To begin with, methods used for data collection in research may be in multiple ways, or they can be answers to questions. The ideal situation would be to collect from more than one source and or collect more than one type of information. The selection of a method for collecting information must balance several concerns, including resources available, credibility, analysis and reporting, resources and the skill of evaluators. Examples of different data collection methods are given below. The first one is the inventory. An inventory or a survey is by definition based on a statistically defined sample of a population. An inventory can be considered as a type of survey. Surveys can be used to study humans or non-human population. Most often the data collecting tool is the questionnaire. The benefits of collecting information from a sample and applying it to a population instead of doing a census of the population are the cost and time saving. There are some basic steps to be considered when designing an interview or survey. By considering these items as you design your collection of information, you will consider some things you might not have and avoid some common mistakes. Do not design a survey or inventory by yourself. Seek assistance and ask subject matter experts. The most effective way to design a survey is to put together a design team containing a statistician, several resource experts, field staff, and end users of the information such as managers. Checklist. Checklist is another method of collecting data. Checklists are usually used in the observation method of data collection. Behavior observation checklist is a list of behaviors or actions among participants being observed. A tally is kept for each behavior or action observed. A questionnaire. A questionnaire, sometimes is also called a survey, is a series of questions that a person answers to provide descriptive data for a researcher. Questionnaires are used primarily for descriptive designs, but the results are often used for inferential statistical analysis also. Testing is another method for data collection. Testing refers to measuring the effect of one or more independent variable. Testing is more commonly used in the science to see if changing some environment or condition will change the outcome or effect of another condition. The point of testing is to look for differences between one group and another. Of course, testing more commonly refers to measuring the before and after effects of a variable or collection of variables in an experiment. Systematic observation. This is yet another method for data collection, and it refers to the careful counting of a phenomena in a natural or laboratory setting. It is systematic because terms are defined beforehand as to what the researcher is looking for, and it is quantitative rather than qualitative because the researcher is counting the frequency of the degree of change of the variables observed. For example, if you want to look at whether gender was a variable where students sit for class, you could count what row students were sitting in and what gender they were in multiple classes. Because observational research can be overwhelming due to the amount of data that there is to observe, it is important to establish a system before you conduct such research. Systematic observation usually leads to descriptive data, but it can be used in experimental and inferential research as well. Next, we come to the components of the data collection method. Each of the methods described consists of two parts: 1. A protocol, and 2. A research instrument. A protocol is a series of systematic steps that must be followed to test and gather results. What's important is that the protocol needs to be determined before you design or begin the study. Many times you will even write the protocol steps in the methods section of your research report, explaining how you conducted your study. The research instrument is the mechanism for recording data. When writing, you could refer to a questionnaire, a systematic observation, rubric or scale as a research instrument. When creating a questionnaire instrument, you want to design your question first to generate data from your participants that will help you answer your research question. Oftentimes, a questionnaire is used with a descriptive design, and thus a hypothesis isn't that important because predicting results doesn't change what the data reveals. The basics of writing a questionnaire. Writing an effective questionnaire requires an understanding of 4 basics. They are: 1. Considering the differences that exist when writing a questionnaire that respondents will fill out themselves as opposed to when a professional interviewer administers the questionnaire to the respondent. 2. Knowing what questions should be asked early on the questionnaire, in the middle, or towards the end. 3rd, understanding how to phrase the questions. And 4th, being sensitive to questionnaire length. Questionnaires can be self-administered or interviewer-administered questionnaires. There are some basic differences in how the questionnaire should be constructed if it is to be filled out personally by the respondent or if an interviewer is going to administer it. These are self-administered questionnaires. It should be simple, straightforward, and logical. Further, the going in assumption with self-administered questionnaires should be that respondents will not complete a questionnaire when there are complex or skip patterns, when pages are crowded or hard to read, or when instructions for completing are overly complex. Self-administered questionnaires should be written with the level of the one who will be filling the questionnaire in mind, while interviewer-administered questionnaires can be quite complex. Because interviewers are trained in the flow of the questionnaire they administer and will conduct a number of practice interviews prior to questioning. Interviewer-administered questionnaire can be easily accommodated skip patterns. Because interviewers are trained in the flow of questionnaires they administer and will conduct a number of practice interviews prior to confronting a respondent, developing a complex questionnaire that is interviewer administered does not present a problem for the respondent. Interviewer administered questionnaires can easily accommodate skip patterns that jump a respondent from one section of the questionnaire to another based on their responses. Sometimes, particularly with face-to-face interviews, the questioning process might also involve showing respondents certain products or exhibits during the interview, or having the respondent read concepts or ideas based on how they respond to various questions. Knowing what questions should be asked early on the questionnaire in the middle or towards the end is important. Questionnaires have a flow to them, usually from the general to the specific. But because the types of studies you can do vary so greatly, as do the goals of every questionnaire, there are no hard and fast rules for the flow of sequence in which questions should be asked. Nevertheless, certain guidelines must be followed. Keep the respondent in one mind set at a time. If at all possible, complete all your questions about one topic before moving on to the next. Don't ask about food intake, then about meal preparation, and then go back to additional questioning on food intake. Ask the easy questions first. Simple questions regarding behavior, such as frequency of buying, brands, or place shopped, or easy for responsible to answer because they don't require a lot of thinking or pondering. As such, respondents quickly get comfortable with the interview. Ask more involved or introspective questions towards the middle of the questionnaire. Be prepared for transition to questions that require thought and consideration after the respondent is a few minutes into the interview, and once the easy questions are out of the way, respondents don't mind giving more thought to complex questions once they are comfortable with the interview format or process. Save sensitive questions for the end. Again, this might not always be possible, but when it doesn't matter, be aware that sensitive questions such as race or income can alienate respondents and turn them off to the entire interview process. If asked at the end, respondents are more likely to answer as they are wholly invested in the questionnaire. Understanding how to phrase questions. It takes very little thought to write out a bunch of questions on a piece of paper and call it a questionnaire. But it takes considerable thought to write questions that are good ones and produce a meaningful questionnaire. Consider the questions below as examples of good and bad questioning techniques. Biased questions. What do you like about the last restaurant where you had your dinner? Assumption here is that the respondents liked something and the question tends to push for a positive response. Unbiased questions. What is there anything you like in the last restaurant where you had your dinner? By simply using "is there anything" as part of the question phrasing, the respondent is not put on the spot to find something to like. Dual thought questions. What, if anything, do you like or dislike about your dinner? With such a question, respondents tend to focus first on the strongest likes or dislikes. If it happens to be something like they like, they will give less thought to what they might not like, and vice versa. Here, it would be much better to ask two questions, one focusing on the likes and the other on the dislikes. Multiple thought questions. With 10 being more important and 1 being least important, how important is it for a commercial food service to have friendly and knowledgeable employees? Friendly is one thought here, knowledgeable is another. When you ask a dual thought, you are stuck interpreting both issues at once. It is probably a good idea that a commercial food service should have both friendly and knowledgeable employees, but it might not be necessary. Being just the friendliest commercial food service would set it apart, as could just being the commercial food service with the most knowledgeable people. Keeping your questions to a simple thought is most always the best approach. Being sensitive to questionnaire length. Questionnaire length is dictated by the study objectives. Some questionnaires take 5 minutes worth of questions to address the objectives. Others will take an hour. Two simple rules of thumb should be kept in mind. Respondents will sit still for 40-page self-administered questionnaire if it is well constructed and easy to complete. They will toss 2 pages questionnaire if it is clustered and complex. Next, coming to questionnaire design. There are 9 steps involved in the development of a questionnaire. First, decide the information required. Next, define the target respondents. Choose the methods for reaching your target group. Decide on question content. Develop the question wording. Put questions into a meaningful order and format. Check the length of the questionnaire. Pre-test the questionnaire, and finally develop the survey form. Deciding on the information required. It should be noted that one does not start by writing questions. The first step is to decide what are the things one needs to know from the respondent in order to meet the survey's objectives. One may already have an idea about the kind of information to be collected, but additional help can be obtained from secondary data, previous rapid rural appraisals, and exploratory research. In respect of secondary data, the researcher should be aware of what work has been done on the same or similar problem in the past, what factors have not yet been examined, and how the present survey questionnaire can build on what they already have been discovered. Further, a small number of preliminary informal interviews will target respondents and will give a glimpse of reality that may help clarify ideas about what information is required. Second, define the target respondent. At the outset, the researcher must define the population about which he or she wishes to generalize from the same data to be collected. For example, in food market research, researchers often have to decide whether they should cover only existing users of the generic product type or whether to also include non-users. Secondly, researchers have to draw up a sampling frame. Thirdly, in designing the questionnaire, we must take into account factors such as the age, education, etc. of the target respondent. The third step is to choose the method of reaching the target respondents. It may seem strange to be suggesting that the method of reaching the intended respondents should constitute part of the questionnaire design process. However, a moment's reflection is sufficient to conclude that the method of contact will influence not only the questions the researcher is able to ask, but the phrasing of those questions. The main methods available in survey research are personal interviews, group or focus interviews, mailed questionnaires, and telephone interviews. The next step is to decide on the question content. Researchers must always be prepared to ask, is this question really needed? The temptation to include questions without critically evaluating their contribution towards the achievement of the research objectives as they are specified in the research proposal is surprisingly strong. No question should be included unless the data it gives rise to is directly of use in testing one or more of the hypotheses established during the research design. There are only 2 occasions when seemingly redundant questions might be included. 1. Opening questions that are easy to answer and which are not perceived as being threatening and or perceived as being interesting can greatly assist in gaining the respondents' involvement in the survey and help to establish a rapport. This, however, should not be an approach that should be overly used. It is almost always the case that questions which are of use in testing hypotheses can also serve the same functions. Dummy questions can disguise the purpose of the survey and or the sponsorship of a study. For example, if a manufacturer wanted to find out whether its distributors were giving the consumers or end users of its product a reasonable level of service, the researcher should want to disguise the fact that the distributor's service level was being investigated. If he or she did not, then rumors could abound that there was something wrong with the distributor. Fifthly, develop the question wording. Survey questions can be classified into three forms: close, open-ended, and open response option questions. Next, putting questions into meaningful order and format. Opening questions. Opening questions should be easy to answer and not in any way threatening to the respondents. The first question is crucial because it is the respondent's first exposure to the interview and sets the tone for the nature of the task to be performed. If they find the first question difficult to understand or beyond their knowledge and experience or embarrassing in some way, they are likely to break off immediately. If, on the other hand, they find the opening question easy and pleasant to answer, they are encouraged to continue. Question flow. Questions should flow in some kind of psychological order so that one leads easily and naturally to the next. Questions on one subject or one particular aspect of a subject should be grouped together. Respondents may feel it disconcerting to keep shifting from one topic to another or to be asked to return to some subject they thought they gave their opinions about earlier. Question variety. Respondents become bored quickly and restless when asked similar questions for half an hour or so. It usually improves response, therefore, to vary the respondent's tasks from time to time. An open-ended question here and there, even if it is not analyzed, may provide much needed relief from a long series of questions in which respondents have been forced to limit their replies to pre-coded categories. Questions involving showing cards, pictures to respondents can help vary the pace and increase of interest. Closing questions. It is natural for a respondent to become increasingly indifferent to the questionnaire as it nears the end. Because of impatience or fatigue, he may give careless answers to the later questions. Those questions, therefore, that are of special importance should, if possible, be included in the earlier part of the questionnaire. Potentially sensitive questions should be left to the end to avoid respondents cutting off the interview before important information is collected. Next is the presentation and layout of the questionnaire. In developing the questionnaire, the researcher should pay particular attention to the presentation and layout of the interview form itself. The interviewer's task needs to be made as straightforward as possible. Questions should be clearly worded and the response options clearly identified. Prescribed definitions and explanations should be provided. This ensures that the questions are handled consistently by the interviewers and that during the interview process, the interviewer can answer, clarify respondents' queries. Ample writing space should be allowed to record open-ended answers and to cater for differences in handwriting between interviewers. Physical appearance of the questionnaire. The physical appearance of a questionnaire can have a significant effect upon both the quantity and the quality of marketing data obtained. The quantity of data is a function of the response rate. Ill-designed questionnaires can give an impression of complexity, medium and too big a time commitment. Data quality can also be affected by the physical appearance of the questionnaire. with unnecessarily confusing layouts, making it more difficult for interviewers or respondents in the case of self-completion questionnaires to complete this task accurately. Attention to just a few basic details can have a disproportionately advantageous impact on the data obtained through a questionnaire. In general, it is best for a questionnaire to be short as possible. A long questionnaire leads to a long interview, and this is open to the dangers of boredom on the part of the respondent. Interruptions by third parties and greater cost in terms of interviewing time and resources. In a rural situation, an interview should not last longer than 30 to 45 minutes. Pre-testing the questionnaire or piloting the questionnaire. Even after the researcher has proceeded along the lines suggested, the draft questionnaire is a product evolved by one or two minds only. Until it has actually been used in interview and with respondents, it is impossible to say whether it is going to achieve the desired results. For this reason, it is necessary to pre-test the questionnaire before it is used in a full-scale survey to identify any mistakes that need correction. The purpose of pre-testing a questionnaire are whether the questions as they are worded will achieve the desired results, whether the question has been placed in the best order, whether the questions are understood by all classes of respondents, whether additional or specifying questions are needed or whether some questions should be eliminated, whether the instructions to interviews are adequate. Usually, a small number of respondents are selected for the pre-test. The respondents selected for the pilot survey should be broadly the respondents of the type of respondents to be interviewed in the main survey. The final questionnaire form. If the questionnaire has been subjected to a thorough pilot test, the final form of the questions and questionnaire will have evolved into its final form. All that remains to be done is the mechanical process of laying out and setting up the questionnaire in its final form. This will involve grouping and sequencing questions into an appropriate order, numbering questions and inserting interviewer instructions. Now we shall see the different types of questions. The questions are the primary tools in collecting necessary information from the respondent of a survey. By making the right choice on the type of survey questions, you will be able to extract only data that are related to the purpose or the goal of the survey. First is the close-ended questions. Close-ended questions limit the answers of the respondent to responses options provided on the questionnaire. An example of a close-ended question are you married? What is your marital status? Next is the dichotomous or 2-point questions. These are the yes and no type questions or the satisfied, unsatisfied type of questions. A close-ended question can also be a multiple choice question. For example, you can have 4 choices of A, B, C or D. Sealed questions that are making use of rating scales such as the Likert scale is a type of a 5-point scale, a 3-point scale, a semantic differential scale and a 7-point scale. Next we come to the open-ended questions. In open-ended questions, there are no predefined options or categories included. The participant should supply their own answers. For example, you can ask an open-ended question on what did you have for breakfast today. The third type of question is the contingency question. Questions that need to be answered only when the respondent provides a particular response to a question prior to them that are called contingency questions. Asking these questions effectively avoids asking people questions that are not applicable to them. For example, have you ever smoked a cigarette? Yes or no? The next question is, if yes, how many times have you smoked? Once, 2 to 5 times, 6 to 10 times, more than 10 times. The question that is asked second is what we refer to as a contingency question following up a closed-ended question. Matrix questions are also closed-ended questions but are arranged in one under the other such that the question form a matrix on a table with identical responses options placed on top. For example, please rate the following characteristics of a food product based on your satisfaction. Use a check mark. You may express your satisfaction as strongly satisfied, satisfied, neutral, unsatisfied, and disagree. Next, we come to the characteristics of a good questionnaire. If you've learned to write a questionnaire well, then you should be able to see these following characteristics. The questionnaire deals with a significant topic, a topic the respondent will recognize as important enough to justify spending his time in completing. Seeks only that information which cannot be obtained from other sources, such as a census data or some secondary data. The questionnaire should be as short as possible, only long enough to get the essential data. It should be attractive in appearance, neatly arranged, and clearly duplicated or printed. Questions are objective with no leading suggestions to the desired response. The questions are presented in good psychological order, proceeding from the general to the specific response. They should be easy to tabulate and interpret. It is advisable to pre-construct a tabulation sheet anticipating how the data will be tabulated and interpreted before the final form of the question is decided upon. Here are some guides for preparing and administering the questionnaire. Get all the help you can in planning and constructing your questionnaire. Study other questionnaires and submit your own questionnaire to faculty members and class members for criticism. Try your questionnaire out on a few friends or associates. Choose respondents carefully. It is important that questionnaires be sent only to those who possess the desired information, those who are likely to be sufficiently interested to respond conscientiously and objectively. A preliminary card asking whether or not the individual would be willing to participate in the proposed study is recommended. It has also been found that in many instances, better response is obtained when the original request was sent to the administrative head of an organization. It is possible that when a superior officer turns over a questionnaire to a staff member to fill out, there is some implied feeling of obligation. If questionnaires are planned for use in institutions, it is imperative that the approval of the project be secured from the head of the institution. If the desired information is delicate or intimate in nature, one must consider the possibility of providing anonymous responses. Try to get the aid of sponsorship. Recipients are more likely to answer if a person, organization, or institution of prestige has endorsed the project. Be sure to include courteous, carefully constructed cover letters to explain the purpose of the study. Some recipients are slow to return questionnaires. An important point to remember is that questionnaires should be used only after all other sources on the topic to be researched have been thoroughly examined. In conclusion, I would like to say that it requires a lot of skill to put the questionnaire writing into practice. You may not be able to write a good questionnaire at the first go. Try to write a short questionnaire for one particular purpose to begin with. Then you can try some more complex once later. Keep trying. Write questionnaires more often so that your skills can improve.